As the rain gently pattered outside the window, I looked down at the cold tea in my hand. The house was as quiet as ever, except that today I knew something had come back into my life. Something, or rather someone, that I had not thought I would have to face again. Elliot, my son's best friend, had just returned to town after many years away. He had grown up, no longer the messy-haired boy with the backpack twice his size, but a real man with a calm gaze that seemed to carry the winters of his foreign land. We met at the door. Literally. I opened the door to find him standing there, drenched in the rain. He smiled, the same smile as before, gentle and a little shy. But this time there was something in his eyes that made me unable to leave too quickly. "I heard you haven't been feeling well," Elliot said. "I think maybe you need someone to visit, sister." He still calls me that, even though the years have passed, even though I'm a divorced woman living alone with cracks that no one can see. We sit and drink tea, talking about trivial things, but really we are probing each other for gaps. He talks about work, about his days abroad, and I just smile, listen, and occasionally sigh. And then something touches the air between us. I don't know if it's a look or the way Elliot leans in when I unconsciously smooth my hair. It's subtle, but enough to make me jump. I've forgotten what it feels like to be looked at as a woman. Not as a mother, not as an old woman, but as someone who can still make someone's heart flutter. And the funny thing is, it's coming from Elliot, the boy who used to sit and eat my sandwiches, who now makes me feel alive. I remind myself that this is just a moment of weakness. But my heart won't listen. It beats strangely when Elliot touches my hand while pouring tea, and his eyes don't look away from me. I know that if this continues, something will change. The days stretched on endless loops of routine and reruns, the kind that made time feel like it had folded in on itself. Liam had become my only tether to something warm, something human. And now this. I should have let go, should have said no. But instead I reached for his hand, softly, carefully, and he let me. Nothing more happened that night. No rules were broken, no lines clearly crossed. But something had undeniably shifted. A window cracked, a door unlocked. A truth stirred, one that we could no longer pretend didn't exist. When the movie ended, we didn't move. The credits crawled up the screen. The storm outside softened into a hush, and I kept holding his hand. Somehow, I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The next morning carried a strange weight. Not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. I woke before dawn, same as always, and shuffled into the kitchen. Barefoot, my robe loosely tied around me. The storm had passed, leaving the air still and damp, the sky painted in that pre-dawn blue that comes just before the sun breaks in gold. I didn't know if Liam was awake. Part of me hoped he wasn't. I needed just a sliver of silence, just a moment to find my breath. I stood at the sink, watching the empty yard as the coffee pot hissed and steamed. But inside, I was anything but still. My thoughts spun, quiet but relentless. What had he meant last night? What had I felt? Had I misread it all, or worse? Had I wanted it to mean something it shouldn't, I didn't have long to wonder. I heard him before I saw him. His steps slow and steady, like he was carrying something too big to name. "Morning," he said, voice gravelly and thick with sleep. I turned and gave him a soft smile I hoped would settle the current between us. "Morning?" He looked at me the same way he always had. But now I could see at the question behind his eyes, hanging in the air between us, like an unfinished sentence. I didn't answer it. Not yet. I poured his coffee and handed it to him like everything was the same. Like we hadn't both felt that door creak open. We sat in silence at the table, sipping while the old wall clock ticked far too loud. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. It wasn't entirely true. "Are you?" He paused, staring into his mug, running a finger around the rim. "I meant what I said last night." I knew he had. But hearing it again stirred something in me. A knot low in my stomach part, fear. But something else I didn't have words for. "Liam, I don't know what to do with that." "I don't either." He set his gaze, lifting slowly to meet mine. "But pretending it's not real, that doesn't help. I've tried. God knows I've tried." He looked away, voice low and tired. "I thought maybe if I ignored it, it'd pass. That it was just some foolish moment, but it's not. And last night I just couldn't hold it in anymore. I should have stopped it. Should have drawn the line like a mother does, like a good mother does. I should have guarded the space between us, put up walls, reminded him of what was and wasn't allowed. But I didn't, because part of me, some part, buried beneath the years, beneath the widowhood and the caretaking and the silence, wasn't just hearing his words. It was feeling them. Deep, honest, unforgiving. And the truth is, I knew what he meant. I'd felt it in the stolen glances, in the lingering hugs, in the way his eyes softened when I walked into the room, wearing that faded silk robe, the one I hadn't worn since my husband died. I'd felt it in our late-night porch talks, when the wine made us say things we shouldn't. When laughter dissolved into silence, and silence turned into something too close for comfort. I'd felt it in the way my heart, against all reason, had begun to flutter again. Not as his mother, but as a woman. And somehow, he had seen that woman long before I remembered she existed. His hand reached across the table. Not insistent, not demanding, just their fingers barely brushing mine. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, almost in a whisper. "I just needed you to know." I nodded slowly, my throat tightening with unspoken truths. Me too. The days that followed felt like walking through a dream I couldn't quite wake from. We didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. The air itself had changed, charged with a quiet tension, heavy with restraint. We were careful with each other, gentle, respectful, but something was undeniably altered. One night, I was folding laundry on the couch when I noticed him watching me from the hallway. I was wearing a plain V-neck shirt. Nothing special, but it dipped just low enough to make me aware of myself under his gaze. I kept folding, pretended not to notice, but my hands trembled slightly as I smoothed the fabric of his shirt. He stood there longer than he needed to. Then he turned and walked back to his room without a word. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts ricocheting between fear and wonder. It had been years since someone looked at me like that. Really looked at me. Not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a woman. And for the first time in a very long time, that woman was waking up again. Terrified, but alive. That weekend, we cooked dinner together. Pasta with a rich tomato sauce, garlic bread, crisped at the edges, and a salad that neither of us touched. We poured red wine, laughed a little too loudly at jokes that weren't all that funny. And somewhere between seasoning the pasta and setting the plates, I felt it again, that shift in the air. As I leaned across the counter to hand him a dish, his hand brushed the small of my back. It was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a quiet ripple through me. We didn't talk about it, just like we didn't talk about the way our eyes lingered a second too long after dinner, or how my breath caught when he reached behind me for the corkscrew, close enough that I could feel the warmth of his chest. We just let it be. Like a song playing low in the background, we existed inside that quiet tension. And then one night it happened. We were watching a slow, moody drama, one of those films full of silences, longing glances, and aching stillness. I'd had 2 glasses of wine. He'd had one. I was curled into the couch, my legs tucked beneath me, wearing an old cotton tank top and soft pajama pants. He sat beside me, closer than usual. Not touching, but close enough that I could feel his presence like a second skin. Halfway through the movie, in a voice barely louder than the rain tapping the windows, he said, "You don't know what you do to me." I turned slowly, unsure I'd heard him right. But he wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at me. Really looking. His face open, vulnerable eyes, glassy in the dark. "Emma," he said, "I think about you all the time. Not just as someone I live with, not as my friend's mother, but as someone who's beautiful, who makes me feel something I thought I'd lost. And I know it's complicated. I know it's not simple, but I can't stop it. I don't want to." My heart pounded, like it had just remembered how. The room seemed to collapse around us. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I just watched as he spoke the very words I'd been too afraid to name. "I want to be near you," he said, leaning in. "I want you to feel what I feel, even if it's just for a moment." And that was the moment everything changed again. But this time I didn't stop him. The silence that followed felt like it could swallow the world. Not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I did. And the truth was terrifying in how easy it came. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached up and touched his face. Just a brush of fingertips against his cheek. My hand trembled slightly. He closed his eyes, leaning into the warmth, like it was the first real thing he'd felt in years. Maybe it was. Maybe it was for me too. We didn't cross any lines that night. We didn't do anything we'd regret. But everything had shifted. He stayed beside me on the couch, one arm eventually wrapping around my shoulders, and I let myself sink into the hollow of his chest. We finished the movie, though neither of us could tell you later what it was about. His fingers found my hair, playing with it gently, and I closed my eyes, listening to his heart. Steady. Sure. a comfort, a question, a storm waiting in silence. I should have felt shame or guilt, but all I felt was peace. And when we finally rose from the couch, careful quiet, like we were stepping through a dream, he met my gaze before disappearing down the hallway. "Good night," I said softly. "Good night, Emma," he replied. But something about the way he said my name, the reverence in it, hung between us like a new truth. The next morning was deceptively normal. I made eggs. He brewed coffee. The sun shone too brightly. Birds chirped outside like nothing had happened. But everything had. Everything had changed. We didn't talk about it, but we didn't have to. We were more careful with each other, more intentional. We started finding reasons to be around one another. He offered to help me clean out the attic, a task he'd avoided for years. I invited him to stay in for dinner more often. We watched movies, cooked together, took long walks in that quiet hour just before dusk, when the sky melted into orange and rose. And one night, as we walked beneath a sky just beginning to bruise with stars, I asked him, "What are we doing, Liam?" He stopped, turned to me and said, "I don't know. But I don't want to stop." And neither did I. Because for the first time in decades, I felt seen, not as a role, not as someone's mother or a widow or a hostess in her own home, but as a woman, desired, alive. Still, I carried the weight of it with me. I thought about my late husband, about what he'd think, about whether any of this would have hurt him. But the guilt I expected didn't land the way I thought it would, because Liam, he'd been there through all of it. The grief, the silence, the invisible loneliness that followed the casseroles and sympathy cards. He knew the version of me no one else did, the one who cried in the laundry room at night, the one who laughed too loud when the wine kicked in, the one who still somehow had softness left in her. And he stayed. He saw all of me and stayed. I remember that late afternoon, the last light of the day stretching across the kitchen windowsill like a silken amber scarf. Elliot sat across from me, his hand wrapped around his teacup, as if he were grasping something more precious than warmth. "Are you leaving?" I asked, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. He nodded his eyes, never leaving mine. "Just a few weeks? A temporary job in Boston," but he hesitated. "You know, if you asked me to stay, all it would take is one word." I looked into his eyes. A long time. They held everything I thought I had lost forever: trust, affection, and unrepentant love. "I won't keep you," I said softly, "but I'll wait." Elliot left the next morning. I stood by the window, watching his car disappear down the red dirt road, feeling less sad than I thought I would. Because for the first time in years, I felt alive. Still capable of loving and being loved. A month later, I received a postcard. No return address, just a handwritten note. "I'm counting the days until I can come back. Don't change the locks. Don't change the teacups on the table. Don't change you, Elliot." I smiled. The chair across from me was still empty. But not empty anymore. I stood up and put another cup on the table, because I knew one day, very soon, it would be filled with the eyes of the person who made me believe, even when you've lost everything, you can still start over.